Hi, welcome
Hi,
everyone.
welcome
Thank you for joining us.
joining us.
My name is Danielle Lamb.
Danielle
I'm an
Lamb,
associate professor at the
professor at the
Department of
Department
Human Resource Management and
of Management and
Organizational
Organization
Behavior at Toronto
at Toronto
Metropolitan University,
University,
and I'm a
and
visiting
I'm a
scholar
visiting
here
fellow
at TMU for
at
this
TMU
year.
for this year.
And it is my privilege
My
to welcome
privilege to
you all to
welcome.
this dialogue today, where our expert panel will address the question of how at risk are jobs to artificial intelligence. So, a very timely and interesting discussion. Before we begin, on behalf of the college, I would like to acknowledge the land that we are on. Massey College is built on land where many Indigenous peoples have lived. It is on the treaty lands and the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee peoples. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege we have to work and exchange ideas on this land. So now I'd like to introduce and shortly pass the mic over to junior fellow Shawn Meikle, who led the organizing of this event. In addition to being a junior fellow here at Massey, Shawn is also a current PhD student at the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resource Management. So thank you, Shawn, for leading us today, and I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Danielle. Welcome, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all today, and I'd like to start by introducing our panel. Beside me is John Baker. He is the business manager of Millwright's Local 2309, serving the Greater Toronto Area, and has been a Millwright and member of the local for 22 years. Millwright's 2309 are proud members of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America. And beside him, we have Alistair Hepburn. He is the executive director of ACTRA Toronto, the largest branch of ACTRA, the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television, and Radio Artists, the union representing performers in the film, radio, television, and new media industries. And online, we have Dr. Danielle Rock, who is an assistant professor of operations, information, and decisions at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. His research is on the economic effects of digital technologies, with a particular emphasis on the economics of artificial intelligence. Also online, we have Gurneet Singh Dandona, who is an associate partner at McKinsey and Company with 12 years of experience serving public and private sector clients globally. He specializes in assessing the impacts of economic trends such as automation and generative AI on work. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Neil Thompson, who is online. He is the director of the Future Tech Research Project, where his group studies the economic and technical foundations of progress in computing, and he is cross-appointed at MIT's Computer Science and AI Lab and MIT's Initiative on the Digital Economy. Welcome to our panel, and thank you for everyone in person and online joining us today. And without further ado, I'd like to launch into our discussion. So I'm going to pose our first question to Dr. Neil Thompson. And I ask you, under what conditions will the benefits of using generative AI outweigh the costs, and in terms of system performance and scale-dependent costs?
All right. Thank you, Shawn. And my pleasure to be here. So when we think about AI and the adoption of AI, it's really important to think about it not as something that's sort of separate from what we know about in general implementing projects. We can think about it as a large IT project that someone wants to put in place. And like a big IT project, that's going to come with a bunch of costs and a bunch of benefits. And we have to think about those separately to understand where AI is going to actually be deployed. And so if we think about the cost side of things, first of all, you can say, well, okay, we're definitely going to have some cost of training a model. People may know very famously building these generative models can be very expensive. GPT-4 is estimated to have cost more than $100 million. The new systems that people are building probably cost more than $1 billion. And so we're very quickly getting to very large numbers in the cost of these systems. But the training costs are just one part of it. You also have the actual cost of buying the data. You actually have, if you're actually someone implementing this, you actually have the cost of putting it in. So there's a last mile problem in AI, where you can imagine if you're a store or somebody putting in a system, you actually have to have someone come in, install it, maintain it. All of those things also come with costs. And so all of those costs come in, and then some of them scale also as the problem gets harder. So one of the things that I think is a little difficult is usually when we think of computer systems, we think of them as being like, okay, well, I have to do some programming to design it, but then it's going to do the job I want perfectly. And that's not the dominant thing we see with AI systems. The dominant thing we see with AI systems is that they're able to do a task, but then you have to invest more and more to get the system to do ever better. And that means more data, more compute, and more training or fine tuning or those kind of things that you're building on top of it. So all of those things are going to come together then to represent the cost that you're going to have to pay. And then we compare that with the benefits, right? And for some businesses, the big part of that benefit is going to be the labor that gets replaced, right? This is sort of the thing that we worry about the most in terms of labor displacement. But there can also be additional benefits, right? So maybe if we make a system more productive, that leads to the firm being able to do more, expanding more, for example, a larger market or something like that. And those are benefits that would often be taken into account by a firm as well. And so that's really the sort of back and forth that firms are facing. And when we did some detailed analysis in my lab about the cost effectiveness of computer vision, what we saw was that only about 25% of all of the tasks which you could imagine AI actually replacing, did you actually want to go and actually do that replacement? Because for the other ones, it wasn't yet cost effective. And so in those cases, what we would expect is there's going to be an initial push because suddenly this new technology comes in and suddenly people are going to want to replace a bunch of jobs. But then there's a more gradual rollout that we would expect to happen later, because that rollout will still happen because costs will come down, people will figure out ways to harness the benefits better. And so all of those things will come in, but it will take some time for the AI to deploy. Okay, and I just want to, as one last thing here, just point out a couple of the dimensions here that really matter when we think about actually what deployment really happens. So the first one is scale. So I mentioned at the beginning that it's really important to think about this as like a large IT project, right? When you do those large IT projects, you often spend a whole bunch of money at the very beginning to build the system and get it running. And then over time, actually, the costs sort of amortize out, but you often have that big investment at the beginning. And so for that to work, you have to have enough scale to apply it that you can actually take advantage of it. And so one of the things that we would expect is going to be deployed primarily in larger businesses. And some work that's been done in the United States about census, with the census work, actually shows that we definitely see that pattern in US firms that are doing the adoption. Two other things that are really important here is that when you think about the cost of building these systems to a certain level of accuracy, two things matter a lot. So one of them is just how complex the problem is. So if you're trying to like make a decision between like a 1,000 different things, you're trying to do a generative model that is saying, oh, I can like try and make pictures of absolutely anything. That's a lot harder system to build than one that has a simpler systems, right? So that complexity of the problem you're dealing with. And then lastly, actually the level of accuracy. And that's sort of a deceptive one, because in AI, all over the place, we see these things called scaling laws. And the way you can think of a scaling law is to say, well, if you build a system and it has some level of accuracy, and you said, well, I want to like have the amount of error that I'm making on that system, you end up having to pay some cost, and it can be pretty substantial, right? And then you say, okay, well, I have the error. Now I want to have the error again. And notice this is a lot smaller, right? Maybe I went from 50% error to 25%, and now I'm going to go 25 to 12.5. Okay, well, now I have to pay that same cost again, right? And so this is a cost that every time you want to get better and better, this cost escalates very rapidly. It's sometimes called a power law. And that means that if you want really, really high level of accuracies in things with a lot of complexity, that actually can cost a lot of money. And that's why some of these systems have been so expensive.
And the format for today is we're going to have another panelist respond to the previous question. So for that, I will turn it over to Alistair Hepburn. Do you have any thoughts on what Neil just said?
For sure. I think first and foremost, for the work that I do, which is represent performers, I want to talk about the human cost. I want to talk about this being a human problem and not necessarily an IT problem. We know that human beings are always going to rush to embrace new technology, and by no means am I fighting against that or pushing back against that. AI is a fantastic tool when used properly. But the consideration that I don't necessarily see always played up in the papers that are written about it is, what is the actual human cost involved with implementing this work? Who is displaced by this work? Who suddenly will not be able to pay taxes because this work has displaced them? Who's not going to go to the grocery store anymore to pay for the groceries? And the cycle then continues. So I think for ACTRA, for performing arts in general, what we want to really talk about is bringing all of this back to the human element. There are absolute places where this is a necessity, where this must be embraced, where this should be championed. But in terms of overall cost, we really want to factor in the human to that. That's really where I want to root this conversation for me, is in that human aspect.
Well said. I want to circle back to something Neil said about accuracy. And there's been a lot of talk of so-called so-so AI. Have you seen that in your industry where it's just good enough and that then it becomes the norm?
Yeah, good enough sometimes is good enough when it comes to content. What we saw over the course of the pandemic was a large amount of content being consumed. You know, people talked about, well, I finished Netflix and now what do I watch? And we've already seen individual movies made in languages other than English, where AI voices have been used to dub it into English. And quite honestly, it's not great, and it's fine. That's about it, though. It's fine, and it's good, but it's not human. It doesn't have performative aspects to it. And so the fear is that just becomes the norm, and we just begin to accept lower quality. And you know, we should be trying to raise our standards, not lower them.
And I want to bring back Neil. And do you have any thoughts on so-so AI?
Yeah, so I think that we should expect indeed that like some of these technologies when they first come in will not be very good, right? But of course we also see very rapid development in these areas. And so I don't think we should assume just because today we're seeing it at a certain level, we should expect that to be true 5 or 10 years from now. And in fact, more specifically, I think we need to be building policies and responses that are thinking about what this is going to look like when those systems get even better. Because there's a very clear pathway for them to get better, and we see people rushing down that path quite quickly.
Awesome. Well, let's leave it there and go to John Baker. John, how is generative AI leading your industry to expand or contract, and how are you managing your workforce for future employment demand in terms of resisting versus embracing generative AI?
So obviously in Ontario, it'd be hard to refute that the construction industry is booming. And truthfully, a lot of our contractors have been using AI in the background for the planning process, the managing process, and the design process. It's taking a lot of the time constraints that would have been involved in some of the projects and the estimate process, and it's reducing it considerably, thus speeding up the process of getting buildings built, as well as having feasibility reports as to whether or not labor would be available with the supply chain problems that we've had recently, the research that's necessary to know whether or not the parts and pieces will be available when you want to have your building or piece of machinery built as well. As for embracing it or turning away from it in the future, we teach our third-year apprentices in a training course about a book called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's all about two mice that are in a maze, and every day they have a piece of cheese that are given to them until one day the piece of cheese doesn't show up. And the one mouse continues to wait for that piece of cheese and unfortunately perishes because he's not willing, or that person is not willing to change. While the other mouse goes throughout the maze and finds different pieces of cheese, new pieces of cheese, and evolves to the environment that he's with. So in general, in the construction industry, if you don't evolve with the industry, you're physically left behind. So we are fully embracing it. We see the future in it. It's something to be proud of, and will make our industry more efficient. I always say things are a perspective where it potentially can displace jobs, but it can also, in a market like we have today, make more projects at one time as well. So depending on how it's framed, I think is how people are looking at it. But in general, it potentially keeps people safer, makes production better, and makes for less errors, both in the actual installation and the planning process as well, to the point where there's programs out there now that can actually sequence work. So it's not necessary to have rework because something's in the way. When a millwright now has to move in a big piece of machinery, we've got to move conduit or a catwalk, whatever it is, these programs are able to tell you that no error, you have to put this piece of machinery in before you can do the rest of it. So as in past, the technology has changed in construction. I mean, going back to when power saws and things came to carpentry, people thought there was going to be jobs lost, but it just evolved the trade, and people got better, and we could build more because of it.
Very well said. Love to bring in Danielle Rock and see if you can speak to the scale effects of technological change and how it can produce even more and more work, and also John's point about the adaptability that different industries need to maintain.
Okay, you cut out just a little bit there, but if you don't mind quickly repeating the last part of your question, I'll tee off from there.
On the adaptability.
The adaptability of different industries. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different ways of thinking about this economically. One of my favorite things to point out to folks is, reconceptualize what a job might be. So if we're thinking about how workers adapt, how employers adapt, what we need to get down to is the fundamental unit of work, which is, often in economic analysis, the task. So when these new technologies show up like AI, they do a few different things. Sometimes they substitute for tasks that people are doing. Typically in a job, you do many tasks. Some of them are a little bit more diversified, less risky, and some of them are a little bit less diversified, and those might get displaced. But oftentimes what might happen is you create new tasks for people to do, or you augment the kind of work that they're doing. Or I think the most neglected one, you create new tasks for machines that people never would have done. So I really love that example, how can you use AI to make a workplace safer? That's a task that technology is not necessarily doing right now, but could be applied to help workers of all types, in those environments do a lot better. So in terms of responses to this, I think you predictably get a lot of people are very scared about what these technologies might do. And I think Neil's point's a great one. First of all, not all of these technologies are worthwhile to actually deploy. They're large IT projects. And then, for the ones that are, we have to think about, are they going to change the nature of how work's going? And is your response going to be, let's block this from happening, let's keep the benefits from ever showing up? Or should you embrace the technology and just, get prepared for change in those contexts? I think people, if you condition them properly, you explain to them that, like, hey, we're not going to use this technology to annihilate the work we're doing. We're going to use it to make it safer, more interesting, more rewarding, and if you can, compensate it even better. Then some of those concerns that Alistair brought up, for example, are less of an issue. That said, there's always cases where it changes the bargaining power of certain actors, not to be too on the nose there, certain actors, but economic actors in general. And, for those very real concerns, there has to be a bit of a negotiation up front before you kind of barrel headlong into deploying the technology. So what I do want to point out, though, as a sort of a final note on that, the enormously varied ways in which AI technologies can change work is a little bit unprecedented, at least for the last few years. I mean, we're talking about folks in creative industries like the movie industry, motion pictures, to music, to construction, to finance, biotech. It's the same set of technologies getting deployed into all of these different locations and applications. So, that's in many ways something that we're unprepared for. I don't think we're ready for change in so many different loci at the same time. And to Neil's point earlier, when you start designing policy, you want to identify places where things are going to change the most and help people adjust for it, to be excited about it, to get ready to train, to use new things, and to deploy these tools in a way that's productive in a more inclusive way than just say, what goes to the corporate bottom line. Great. John, can you build on the point Daniel was making about the unexpected places where generative AI might pop up? You had mentioned health and safety. You had mentioned modeling and work planning for interferences. And I can also think of scheduling work activities.
Absolutely.
Where is it coming for next in our industry?
Well, I think visually, everyone's seen the Boston Dynamic robots that everyone believes we're going to be replaced with in the field, but I don't think we're there. And quite frankly, the human input side of things is, I believe, going to be necessary as well. So a lot of people outside of the industry focus on their job being taken, whereas people within the industry, I find they use the word task quite a bit. So it's not meant to replace jobs. It's meant to take some tasks that were easier to do or less desirable to do, and it takes them off of the plate of the individual, making them more efficient in other ways. So the fear of jobs being replaced, I don't think is quite as justified as most people put it to. It's more of a personal assistant or a helper that can help you with your job throughout your day as it is now.
And then can you make that example concrete for people? The Boston Dynamics dog, where have you seen that on the job site?
So us specifically in the nuclear industry, where we've had the Boston Dynamics job, our dog performs some high radiological work where you don't necessarily want to have a human being taking that kind of dose as well. Prior to that, we have used electronics. There were, for lack of a better term, remote control cars for retrieving hot particles and things that had gone missing. So again, to do the research and development to know what exactly it is and how to retrieve it and how to safely retrieve it without having an individual person that's actually being dosed or put at risk at any time. So the technologies have been used within industry for many years and evolve greatly every year to potentially keep our people safe. So in that scenario, it's a welcome addition to the workforce.
Great example. I'd love to bring in Gurneet now. Under what conditions will generative AI augment or substitute workers in various industries?
Thank you, Shawn. I think this is a question on everybody's mind, and in my view, a difficult one as well. Let me try to put some structure together and then share some findings from our paper as well. When we look at augmentation versus displacement, right, three things are more important than others. One is, like my other panelists mentioned, we all know each occupation is a collection of many work activities they do, tasks they perform. So we are assessing the penetration of technologies. We should look at what proportion of tasks are getting affected than just looking at the occupation alone. Second, the time for development of these technologies to actual adoption is also quite large. There are many barriers: cost, societal, ethical, most important, human preferences, which delay the adoption. IVRs have been up there for like 20 years. We still press 9 on our phones to talk to a customer service reps as soon as we get a chance, actually. We still like live performances more than listening to music anywhere else. Cost of sushi done by a sous chef or executive chef is even higher. Basic things like haircut also have human preferences. So even if technologies are available, the way human accepts it or the way companies accept it is relatively very different, and in different places, very, very different adoption timelines as well. We are talking about Gen AI in particular. Trust factor is a big question there. So in a courtroom, judge being replaced by AI will take some real good time. But at the same time, the judge can use AI to really use or speed up the documentation process or the research process. Lastly, the effect on any job is not a factor of just technology, but rather changing business needs, availability of those skills, specific talent, broader factors like investments, productivity. Bunch of these things affect the demand levels. For example, today the first draft of software code can be written by AI. Sure, great. But look at the job openings. They are surging. We are still not able to find those skills and meet the demand. Additionally, if you look at some of the large trends, we are aging, right? Fertility rates are lower. We know 25% of the US population will be above 65 years of age. Labor shortages are peaking, and they are structural in nature. It's not cyclical. And there are many future priorities as well, net zero, infrastructure priorities, which will come into play more and more. So it is not just a factor of technology when we look at displacement versus augmentation. So when we try to piece these things together, a lot of nuanced insights come into picture. So first, we should I think we'll all agree the penetration of automation because of Gen AI has accelerated. We calculated it as there's a 10 percentage point adoption that might accelerate by 2030 in the US in particular, which takes the automation of work activities from 20% to 30% by 2030 because of this new technology. But at the same time, a lot of these professions where Gen AI is accelerating, their demand continues to increase, particularly in tech and some of the business professionals. Look at historical, like just 2019 to 2023 numbers for managers. It's one of the most affected occupation by AI and Gen AI, and they were the most resilient because they let the organization survive in those uncertain times. At the same time, and on the contrary, occupations where business needs are also changing and automation is also high, displacement might be higher. These are, for example, like customer service, food service, production jobs, some of the sales jobs. These professions are more affected by traditional automation and not just Gen AI, and their business models are also less supply deficit. The barrier to entry to these professions are relatively very low compared to some of the higher skilled, higher wage cognitive professionals, which take like 4 to 6 years to just enter. So, if I sum up the overall debate about, in my view, about augmentation versus displacement, right? And we look at uh, overall trends which are creating jobs and destroying jobs, we found that most jobs where Gen AI in particular is accelerating is mostly an augmentation story, where tasks will be changed and what you are doing today versus what we will do tomorrow will be very different. But at the same time, in occupations which are relatively less skilled, and where supply is not a problem, their displacement might be slightly higher.
Great, thank you. And I'll turn it over to John. And John, I'm curious if you can build on Gurneet's points about the accelerating pace of change. I know in our industry, shutdowns used to last 3 months, 2 months, and now they're continually compressing in time and scale. So I think that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. So for all the facilities that we deal with, as they say, time is money. So like Shawn says, when the facility's down for 6 months, that's a considerable amount of money. Whereas in today's world, it's been reduced to probably about a 3 to 4 week window where the facility can have their people go out, our people go in, install the machinery, and they're back up running on a much tighter schedule than the previous. And again, allows for more projects to be going on at the same time as well, right?
And that said, so you haven't noticed a decrease in the overall level of work. You're seeing a scale effect in the more efficient you get, the more work you get.
Yeah, that's correct. So our membership has been growing steadily over the last 10, 15 years. And with the automation and the speeding up of the process, we haven't seen a shrink in membership. It's quite the opposite, that we see growth. And as we prove success within the province and the country, we see exponential growth as people not only see that they can be successful, but in the event of a breakdown or an emergency, that the resources are there for them as well.
And Gurneet, back to you. I'm curious, under what conditions we observe generative AI having a scale effect or leading to a collapse in the industry?
I think it depends on a bunch of factors, where uh, societal pressure or acceptance rates or risks, or even the costs are lower or higher. You would I would compare two countries, right? Like look at India versus US, or look at any other low cost country. Ultimately, our aim is to produce the best amount of goods at lowest level of prices. You do it through automation, or you do it through people. That is the biggest task. And then for companies, it's about accelerating profits. So if we are trying to optimize without risking a bunch of these things, the scale might be higher. But if as soon as the cost, risk, human acceptance comes into picture, uh, they tend to be lower in adoption rates. And I'll pick up healthcare for example, right? Like, a lot of these technologies have been present for a very long time. Productivity benefits in healthcare have been stagnant. uh, why? Because human acceptance rates are relatively lower. We did see a surge through telemedicine, by the way, um, in healthcare, and same is the question with ed tech, right? And even like the the most expensive business schools went online, but people again went back to them because there is benefits in experiential learning when you do it with people together. Um, so I can definitely buy a T-shirt which is produced by a robot for 90% lower costs, sure. But would I trust, like example of a courtroom, right? Like somebody else taking a decision, like a AI taking a decision on behalf of like a human, relatively low.
Very well said. Okay, let's turn it over to Alistair. Alistair, what regulation or policy changes could ease the disruptive impact of generative AI on employment in your industry?
Our friends to the south in the United States have just put in place, specifically in Tennessee as a start, something called the Elvis Act. And the Elvis Act focuses on the VLI, is voice, likeness, and image. And they put protections in place that essentially allow the owner of the brand to control it. So governments are very happy to protect brand copyright. So if we think of the Golden Arches, we immediately know what that is, and we know where it can be used. We know who can use it and who can't use it. And lawsuits tend to appear if you try to use it and it's not yours. And really what we're looking for is something along the same lines for human beings, right? We want brand protection for human beings. I should own my face. No one else should be allowed to use my face without me saying you can use it. No one else should be allowed to use my voice. And if I want to allow you to use my voice, then I should be able to and be compensated for it. For many folks, you talked about being able to be in a couple of places at once, running more jobs. That works for performers as well. If you want to license your voice to an audiobook while you're filming a movie, dynamite, right? You can now be in two places at once as long as there's a compensation factor involved. So having things like that, those sorts of fences put in place, we talk about the 3 C's for us. It's consent, compensation, and control. So it's the consent to know what's happening with your name, your image, your likeness, your voice. The compensation for the use of that, right? If you want to use my technology in a job site, and you want to use it in 3 different job sites, as long as you pay for that, dynamite, right? You're going to be free to use it. And then the control, so that I then control where the rest of my data is used. You loan your piece of machinery out. You don't want the person you loan it to reverse engineer it and then continue to use it, and now they're making money on it and not you, the person who should own it. So really, that's what it is that we're going to be looking for. The No AI Fraud Act in the US is speaking towards that. That was all because of Taylor Swift. We have laws already in British Columbia that protect for intimate images, deep fakes, essentially. That is what we really want to see. It's name, image, likeness, and voice protections. Those guardrails are going to go a long way to ensuring the smooth transition into AI. Because again, we talked about health and safety, and just for the industry that I work in, there are lots of benefits for AI when it comes to health and safety. It's much easier to light an AI human on fire than it is to light a real human on fire and then throw that person off a 30-story building. I'd much prefer that be done so no one gets injured, and AI is a great way to do that. We wouldn't have a lot of the superhero things that we do already without CGI and AI and the use of that. So there's lots of great uses for it, as long as there are controls put in place. That's really what we're after.
Very well said. And let's turn it over to Neil. Do you have any thoughts on the guardrails you could put in place?
Yeah, so first I want to strongly agree with what was just said there. I think that it's, particularly when it comes to people's own likenesses and stuff, it makes a lot of sense to have these kind of guardrails in place. And I think a lot of the sort of the worst effects of AI can be eliminated from that. I think, however, when we think about unemployment over the medium term, I think we need to think about not just like people's own likenesses being taken, but actually the creation of totally artificial, like in this case, totally artificial actors or totally artificial singers or something of that ilk. Because as these things develop, you might say, in the same way that we do animation for some things, or we do visual effects for some things, we say we don't want a human there. The question is, as it gets easier to have an AI actor doing this, then actually maybe you're going to start seeing that as well, right? And so I think that over the medium term, that's the bigger question that's going to come in. And I think it's very mixed if we think about the effect that that's going to have, right? Because in general, when we see the price of something fall, we expect to see a lot more of it in the market, right? And so if you think about, for example, video content that we get on YouTube, right? As video production technologies have fallen, we get an explosion of that. And that's actually met a lot of niches that people didn't have met before. And I suspect we'll see the same thing as AI comes into this industry. And the question is just going to be, as that actually happens, what is that going to mean for the actors that are there? And I suspect, given the economics of it, I suspect it means that in a lot of cases, they'll actually be safe for quite a while, because building a completely AI actor would be very expensive in a lot of ways. But of course, these costs are coming down over time, and the question is, how is that going to play out?
Great answer. And Alistair, back to you. I'm curious if the cost prohibitive point of applying this technology, as Neil pointed out, is a factor in how quick we need to put this regulation in. As we see the price of AI and developing AI come down, what's the urgency for regulation?
I mean, we're already past urgency point when it comes to the use of voice, as an example. Microsoft have a product now where with 3 minutes of your voice and the room tone that you're in, they can reproduce you. We've done a couple of videos available that essentially take me, run me through AI, and within 10 minutes, I was speaking Japanese, Hindi, and German with the mouth moving, using my voice to do it. It cost us $16 US to do that. So voice is already there. We're well past that point. In terms of generating a brand new human, a brand new avatar, we're not quite there yet, but we're rapidly approaching it. If you look at the leaps and bounds by which the OpenAI sources are moving, we just saw a release of, I think it's called Solara, and cinematic worlds created with the prompts of about 10 words suddenly becomes concerning. Voice, we're past the point of concern. It's already cheap enough to do. Visuals are coming soon. Everyone has seen a de-aged Mark Hamill. Everyone has seen a de-aged Harrison Ford. Again, those are big budget films, but I think as that price point lowers and lowers, we want to ensure that the guidelines are in place. And to Neil's point, it's the creation of the brand new, the synthetic human is absolutely a concern. Who owns that synthetic human? And I think copyright laws are going to really play into that. We've already seen a couple of judges rule that anything that is AI created cannot be copyrighted. So who owns that work now? And that may actually be something that helps kind of slow down the process, because the last thing a producer of a film or television series or any sort of technology wants to do is create something, put it out in the marketplace, and not actually be able to copyright it, and have someone else just be able to then take it. So that may actually help slow things down.
Great. And let's turn it over to Daniel now. Daniel, in 1987, Robert Solow observed that computers are everywhere except in the productivity statistics. Have you experienced an increase in productivity since adopting AI? Productivity levels are decreasing despite increasing adoption of AI. Why might this be the case?
Okay, well, I'll get into my personal experience deploying AI in a little, but let me first say, okay, productivity levels are not decreasing, at least not generally. Productivity growth has been slowing down since roughly 2005 compared to the decade prior to 2005. So we had the dot-com boom for a while. That elevated productivity growth for a few years, and then lately it's kind of been disappointing in most of the developed world. Now, whether or not AI has shown up in the productivity statistics so far is a little bit of a debate, though I would be very skeptical to think that the gains from this technology, especially the more recent vintages of it, have been deployed in any kind of mature way. So my colleagues and I, so co-authors on this particular paper were Eric Brynjolfsson and Chad Severson. We hypothesized that there's a phenomenon called the productivity J-curve, and it harkens to a little bit of what Neil was talking about earlier. When you make a big upfront investment in technology, and it's a large IT project, for example, you have to make a lot of other investments. You have to train people, you have to reconfigure your business, you've got to come up with a new business model in some cases, you have to build a lot of intangible investment at the same time that you do your tangible investment. So in like the first wave of software, you buy a whole bunch of computers. If they're sitting in your loading dock, they're not worth very much. You have to integrate them into your organization. You have to get IT people to support them. I mean, printers on their own are probably, I don't know why we can't get printers right. They're the same thing that we've had for 30 years. It doesn't seem to work. But most technology, you get it to work with these organizational investments. There's sorts of things where you might call up Gurneet and his colleagues too to help you implement it. So with all of that upfront investment, for a little while, it looks like you put a lot of tangible stuff in. You make choices that have opportunity costs. You forgo measurable kinds of outputs of different sorts in the beginning. So you put a lot of that in to get less out because you're building an intangible asset that's hard to measure. So that can seem to be a drag on productivity growth. But longer term, of course, as Neil pointed out, those costs, that intangible asset you built, starts to spit off money in return that's very much tangible. And then it looks like you get something for nothing, and productivity growth is growing as we get more for say, less or fewer units of input for every unit of output. So this is kind of a long-standing story. It happens with every major technology wave, and I don't think we should necessarily worry if productivity growth is a little bit slower in the beginning, but we see the technology, we see experimentation with the technology start to happen. Longer term, I do expect productivity to grow a lot as a result of this, but we should also keep in mind the broader context. There are demographic reasons, human capital accumulation reasons, a whole bunch of other, kind of macro headwinds that I'm sure Bob Gordon at Northwestern would be happy to discuss with us that kind of go against the gains that we'll be getting from this technology. So it's really incumbent on us to keep innovating and to keep pushing to drive TFP, even when stuff like new people going to school, years of school, that's kind of slowed down relative to the growth rates that we had before. But it's important to keep that distinction between levels and growth. Now, one of the reasons, my personal experience is obviously driving my interest in a lot of this stuff. When it comes to doing economics research or some of the other stuff I'm up to, I am way faster, much more productive with generative AI. Things I hate doing, I can plug into various models, and there's all sorts of new research projects that are opened up. So I think for my total bundle of tasks, I'm roughly 20% more productive with them. If you don't include teaching, for teaching, I've had to change the way I do things, but I've operated through incentives instead. I'm happy to talk about that, but it's a little bit off topic. I still have to, show up, do a lecture for an hour and a half for my students twice a week, and I'm not sure generative AI can help there yet. And if you can embed my likeness into a video or something, I'm not sure who wins there. Maybe it's my students that can watch the video on twice the speed and save themselves some time. So maybe we'll get there. We'll see.
Great. Want to bring Gurneet. Do you buy that it's a measurement issue, that there's these productivity growth headwinds, and that's muddling the numbers up, or do you have an alternative hypothesis?
I fully agree with my friend Danielle. First, being a numbers guy, let me put some perspective, right? Like the world's, or like major world's median productivity increased from $7,000 to $41,000 in the last 25 years. That's a 7.3% increase every year. Even if you look at average, that increased from 21,000 to 50,000. That's a 2.3% increase. So productivity is increasing. It's the growth which has not matched expectations. A lot of things Daniel explained. One other point that I would like to add is post GFC, global financial crisis. If you look at the investments being made overall, there is a sharp fall, and that has led to a deceleration in a growth of productivity for a major of the countries. Before that, if you see, there were the big conversions that was happening between the developed world and the developing world. So that's one. The second thing is, as Daniel mentioned, there is definitely a J curve, uh, and from the time these technologies become developed uh, to them being deployed and then deployed at scale is a relatively large amount of time. Thankfully, now with new AI and Gen AI, there is hope because the costs are relatively very, very low. The use has become accessible. It is less patented than before. So you might see upticks, and in the US, it's started to see as well. So there is a lag, and which might be shortened by the newer version of technology. But then second, a lot of services that these things offer is free, right? Like Google Maps has shortened or reduced the time to travel, nowhere accounted. A lot of services are being given um, for free. For example, if you look at telemedicine for now, uh, there are two modes of doctor prescription now available to a particular consumer. Will they increase or will they decrease the penetration or the revenue will come to life, but it is also some of this digitization is also a replacement or a switch. So you don't see it in the measurement till the time either the numerator is increased in productivity or denominator is falling. So it's a I fully agree it's a measurement issue as well, because we do not count the intangible benefits in a way that we count the tangible benefits.
Great. Well, thank you all for those wonderful exchanges. I'd just like to go around the table one last time and see if anyone has any final thoughts before we turn it over to audience questions. We're doing great for time. So Neil, do you want to kick us off? Last word on AI and employment.
Yeah, so I think I just want to mention that, this debate has rightly been focused on the employment effects of AI, and that, we need to think about that a lot because there really are some alternative futures here where, either there could be a lot of unemployment or there could not be, depending on how well society can adjust. And so thinking about that and the consequences is very important. But I also want to just make sure that we think as well about the benefits that are going to come from the AI as also accruing a lot of benefit to society, right? And so, if we think about artificial voices and images and stuff like that, we only need to think about the revolution that happened at the first wave of artificial voices, when people who were hearing impaired were suddenly able to get access to a lot more materials, right? You can imagine that as translations became cheaper, all of a sudden people could get access to stuff that wasn't in their language. There are a lot of benefits that are going to accrue. And so a lot of, I think what we need to do is be managing the process where we say both things are happening at once, and we need to make sure we get as much as we can, we're getting the benefits while minimizing the downsides. But it's very important. Some people are saying, like, put the brakes on entirely. And I think we would give up a lot to society and a lot of benefits if we were to do that.
Thank you. Gurneet, last word?
Yeah, I think it's a fundamental issue that we should think about AI as well, that there is a risk factor as well. When I say risk, one of the biggest thing that I see is biases that is being generated when AI is being deployed. There are we get what we feed. Do we agree all that what we feed is a reflection of our past and not a reflection of our future? I think a lot of us will agree. Do we want that to happen? A lot of what will say no. uh, so I think there's an important debate on how and where it gets deployed, how often does it deployed, and then who decides what is the correct measure in terms of usage and in what particular stances. So that's a very important one as well from my angle.
Said. Daniel, anything?
Any last thoughts? Sure. I mean, I very much agree with what Neil and Gurneet said. Honestly, my mild bias is to pour gasoline on the development of these technologies and kind of see what happens, because I think there's a remarkable unleashing of human creativity that happens with them. So one thing that we haven't mentioned yet that is something I've grown fond of saying is that I think the focus on decoders, the part of these models that generates outputs we understand, text, images, video, in some cases, speech. I think there's lots of interesting applications, and it helps us. Those help us do things that we do today really well, and it doesn't involve as much creativity to see how those things can be impactful. But the encoder side, where we take those same unstructured data sources and encode them as vectors of numbers, and then can operate on those vectors of numbers, as a form of software. Thinking about these models as continuous databases where you can retrieve from a natural language prompt like find me a cheap and scalable way to manufacture graphene, which, as far as I know, doesn't exist. But if we managed to do it, would create things like instantaneous battery charging, or so some of my friends who are material scientists tell me. Like that sort of stuff has phenomenal potential, and I think we should focus on that. These are things that, from a job perspective, will create tons of new work. And then just to answer Jawad's question, the paper for the productivity J-curve is just called the productivity J-curve, so that one should be easy to find. And then for doing analytics and data, I'm happy to chat about that more in the audience question side. But yes, I use these models in my research all the time, particularly from that encoder perspective.
Awesome. John.
There's been technology advances, and it have been good, are used for good or bad. It's us as individuals coming together collectively to have the conversations like we're having today to make sure that we're utilizing it in a beneficial way for us, rather than the negative ways that could be used, right? So ultimately, it is what we make it, and the beginning of AI was what we taught it, and it'll continue to be that way. We're going to learn as it learns, and the way it benefits us, we should continue to utilize. And places that it wouldn't benefit us, then we got to figure out how we can minimize and obviously not let that happen. But it's at face value a great technology, and will probably be our future, and hopefully advance what we do collectively exponentially over the next few years. So look to hopefully embrace it and grow exponentially over the next few years and have a better life for it.
Well said. Alistair.
I think for us, we're really looking to just keep humans at the center of AI development, ensuring that the human voice remains at the center and the heart of it. Will also help to ensure that, to Gurneet's point, the inherent biases that we're building into AI, whether we mean to or not, are kept in check. When you look at large language models, and which have an inherently Western bias to them, when you look at languages that may not necessarily live in written format, when you look at Indigenous languages in Canada, they are being left behind when it comes to AI, when it comes to large language models. And ensuring that we keep a focus on the human aspect of it as we develop AI, I think kind of keeps us centered in the lane. And that's really what we'd be looking for.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again. And at this time, we'd be happy to take any audience questions at the back.
Hello. Thank
Hi.
you, everybody. It's a nice afternoon to be sitting here and talking about AI development. My name is Wanja. I'm a journalist and a content developer. And I think that I would like to concur with the speaker at the extreme right about the human cost of AI development, because the question we are having here is how at risk are jobs? As a writer, I can tell you for certain that we are feeling the effect. We are losing jobs. We have actually lost them in very big numbers. And the alternative roles that AI is offering, or developers are offering, for example, I do some work teaching AI how to write creatively. These tasks are even making us more, our jobs are getting further risked and lost. So I think that over and above the positives that AI is bringing to our lives, there is absolute and necessary need to counter development with the human concerns that we face. So I think that my speaker at the extreme right, I concur again, because I think that AI development has got to be human-centered. You have got to approach it from a human rights perspective. For example, when we talk about biases, again, we are seeing these biases very openly and very clearly, biases against gender, biases against skin color, biases against geographic locations. I sat in a class just last week, and my professor was discussing a scenario where AI models are being developed to deny services on the basis of color. And he gave a very simple example about a sanitizer dispenser, like the one in the corner over there, where the model has been developed such that if you're white, if your skin color is white and you put your hand out, you get the dispenser to give you a sanitizer. If you're black, you don't get it. So these are concerns that we have really to approach very, very carefully and very mindfully, because these things are here with us and they are affecting us. The other issue, the speaker on television whose name I didn't get is bringing out a very pertinent issue. It is that AI development has already overtaken human capacity to control, contain, and manage this. So I think that discourses have got to be very, very mindful. And I think I would vote for, if I was asked to to take a vote, I would say stop everything and put down procedures, protections, guidelines that will govern how AI is going to be interacting with humans. Thank you.
And thank you for the question. And I would love to turn that back over to Danielle Rock. You did this to yourself, move fast and break things, pour gasoline on the fire. How do you respond to the audience?
Well, certainly there are places where there are negative consequences for these models. And I think, we don't discover those things unless, at least someone tries to go ahead and build those things. Something I think people, like something that terrifies me, for example, I'm worried that someone would use these models to build bioweapons. But often good AI policy is not special to AI. Good AI policy is just good policy. Just as we need to protect workers independent of the reasons that they might be displaced, or in the case that there are racial or gender biases in how one of these models work, you don't want racial or gender biases generally. You want to make sure that the way people conduct themselves, that they're responsible for what AI does. Who are the residual claimants here, and can we make them responsible for what their models are doing? So, I don't want a policy that says don't build a bioweapon with AI. I want a policy that says don't build a bioweapon. I want to help workers who are going to be displaced. And at the same time, I think we should be building these things, because if we don't discover where the risks are, then it's very hard to foresee how to mitigate them. I think often we mistake our forecasting ability for being very high quality, when in fact it's very low quality. And at the same time that we have these issues, we have great things. Instead of a bioweapon, we have people designing new types of antibiotics. This is a tool, and I think we were mentioning this earlier. It's hard to say where these safety benefits are going to show up, or where these risks might be, without having a deployment, or without having some sort of sense of where people are being negatively affected. So in my work, I try to build some measurements of where, in the labor market, we might expect changes. I think when it comes to journalists, some of those issues, eradicating journalists' jobs longer term, are more structural to the journalism industry. And in many cases, I think we'll see failing businesses blame AI for the choices that they're making, when it was actually the business model itself that was broken in the first place. And we have to be careful there that the people who are responsible are the ones held to account for bad decision making, and not allowed to scapegoat technology for the reasons that they're creating bad outcomes.
Very well put. Good AI policy is just good policy, period. There is another question at the back?
How much time do we have?
44 seconds.
44 seconds. Okay, because I saw 2 hands. Do we have any online questions? Keep this quick then.
Hi. So my question is more about policy monitoring and implementation. I'm also an ACTRA member. And so I'm wondering, if a bad faith actor acquires this technology and reproduces my likeness without my consent, how do I know? Do I wait for someone to just stumble on that video and find it for me? Or do we, as members of the public, have access to a monitoring system that allows us to find these bad uses of it and then apply policy?
So if
Go for it.
I could, here's where we actually get to use technology to help find technology, right? I think we were talking earlier about a professor at the University of Toronto who was actually using AI to source out papers that had been written by AI. And that's, here's an example of pour gasoline on it and let's make it happen, is let's develop something that can actually find your likeness, right? That sort of likeness bank where you can upload yourself and be able to be found so that the AI can actually find it on your behalf. But, again, I hope I didn't come across as being anti-AI. I'm not. I just want to ensure that we do keep the humans in the middle of all of this conversation. That's paramount for me. I don't want to live in WALL-E, right? I don't want to live in that world. I want to live in one that's focused on humans.
Great place to end it. Oh, David, one more question.
There's a recent book out just the last couple of weeks by Fareed Zakaria, the journalist, and it's entitled The Three Major Revolutions in the Last 300 Years. Anyway, for our purposes of discussion today, he talks about what he calls the AI revolution going on today, and he compares it to the Industrial Revolution, the early 19th century, which changed the whole character of work, mass production and all of those things entailed. And he points out, he does a comparison between the good fallout and the bad fallout from the Industrial Revolution, and compares it to what will be the good fallout and the bad fallout from the AI revolution. But what are your thoughts? I mean, that's a big picture question, comparing the AI revolution to the Industrial Revolution. And if that comparison is valid, that is a big thing to start thinking about.
Neil, are you able to draw a parallel between the Industrial Revolution and the AI revolution?
Yeah, I think that's a nice comparison, and it's one that economists, I think, often go back to in their minds when they think about this. I think that there are a couple of things that we can take from that comparison, right? So I think, indeed, what we are seeing is that AI is allowing us to do a whole range of work that we couldn't do before, opening up new possibilities, as Dan said very eloquently. And so I think, in the same way that the Industrial Revolution, all of a sudden there were a whole bunch of new tasks that were being done. I think we should absolutely expect that to happen here. The new business models being created and all of that coming in place. I think also that this question gets at something very, very important when we think about the transition that labor is going to go through. Because I think there are going to be sort of two waves of AI implementing that are going to hit. So the first one is really just a sort of direct substitution. It says, we have a way of doing things, we have existing processes, and we say, well, this is one that's being done by a human, let's substitute in an AI to do that for instead. And so but you're keeping the process the same. And something that we saw during the Industrial Revolution, and particularly we saw during electrification, was that that's sort of the first step. And then in the second step, people say, well, wait a minute, let me reconceptualize the process overall and say, how can I change it so that I can take better advantage of this automation? And in that case, from that electricity can provide, in this case, that AI can provide. And so I think that's likely to happen as well. And so I think we're going to get this real efflorescence of new business models and new kind of tasks being done. I think that's going to be a super interesting one. And the question is, of course, what is that going to offer us that we're not even thinking about today?
This has been lovely. I appreciate all the speakers for coming out, and for the audience online and in person. That concludes today's session.